we're all here. Hope you're wearing some stout shoes and you've got your Rain Max packed. We'll begin. Befell that in that season on a day, in Southwark at the Tabard as I lay, ready to wenden on my pilgrimage to Canterbury with full devout courage. Join now our stroll through the highways and pavements of Southwark, extending southwards from the dragon boundary marks at the southernmost part of London Bridge, London's first bridge, where Jack Cade fought against city corruption. Southwark, always the space outside the city walls, where different rules applied, where, until only relatively recently, first with the incursion of PricewaterhouseCoopers, did the city begin its corporate incursion into our midst. Southwark, historically and still a place of theatre and revelry, of arrival and departure. The Pilgrim Fathers from the Mayflower, 1620 from Rotherhithe, seeing as you asked. Chaucer's Canterbury Pilgrims from the Tabard Inn. Southwark, extending to the leafy green tips of Dulwich Village. The borough, a stamping ground of civil rights activist and physician Harold Moody, health and political education pioneers Alfred and Ada Salter, the Peckham experiment, Charlie Chaplin, William Henry Platt, that's Boris Karloff to you, artists of local and international renown. Bob Marley dropped by. Its multicultural marketplaces, coffee shops, pubs, bars and nail bars. The cheapest cinema in London. A thriving cultural centre, all breathing, fizzing and colliding and... But enough of the past. What of the future? Is Southwark's day done? Are we merely the cheapest stop on the Monopoly board? Old Kent Road. But you knew that. Incidentally, Southwark is the biggest social landlord in London, with over 50,000 homes. You might have seen the recent Channel 4 documentary. Yeah, we're trending. Council homes have been lost to the right to buy, some demolished. Some 11,000 households are on the waiting list, about the same number of homes the council hopes to build in the next 20 odd years. Do we want a place where we can dream, breathe, play and live? Or one fashioned for us by property developers? Do we want to live in socially cleansed opportunity areas, in the shadow of developers' shiny 20-story designer condominiums? Or do we want to create and work together, building and making something better, something greener, a people's borough that we can be proud of? You decide. On our tour, we're going to meet people, local residents, activists, architects, artists, and decision makers, all with a story to tell. Let us take our first steps. Anne.
So we're going to begin our tour in the north of the borough and wend our way slowly south. We're going to start at the Elephant and Castle, where we're going to meet Jerry Flynn. Jerry's lived in the area for most of his life, and he's a leading campaigner in the 35% and Up the Elephant campaigns. He's going to tell us a bit about his own personal story growing up on the Haygate estate, which is no longer exists, and about the current developments around the Elephant and Castle. So over to you, Jerry.
Hello everyone, my name's Jerry, and I lived with my family on the Haygate estate at the Elephant and Castle from the time it was built in 1974. My parents had come to Britain in the 50s, and we were one of many Irish families on the estate. Before we lived on the Haygate, we had been living in private accommodation just off the Woolworth Road, where there were 6 of us in a 2-bedroom flat, and where we had no kitchen, no bathroom, and no hot water. So when we moved to the Haygate, it was a definite improvement. We moved into a 4-bed masonette with all modern conveniences: central heating, bathroom, kitchen, and plenty of room for all of us. Most of our neighbours on the Haygate had also moved from the same kind of private accommodation, and the streets and the homes we left behind were demolished. The Haygate was an ordinary South London estate. The people who lived on it were ordinary Londoners: builders, health workers, transport workers, teachers, office workers, taxi drivers, pensioners, who all went about their daily lives the same as everyone else. We never thought we were living on any kind of sink estate, notorious for violence. This was an undeserved reputation the estate only acquired much later, and I would say that most of the people, most of the time, were reasonably happy living on the Haygate. Like all council estates, the Haygate suffered for many years from underinvestment, and at the end of the 90s, Southwark Council decided to demolish and rebuild it, with new and better homes for everyone living there. This is not what happened though. Years passed with no progress, and in 2007, Southwark moved everyone off the estate without building the new homes that had been promised, to allow demolition to proceed. Instead of moving to the so-called early housing sites that were to have been the Haygate residents' new homes, council tenants were simply shifted into current council housing stock. The 180 or so leaseholders who had bought their council homes got compensation, but nothing like enough to buy a new home in the local area, with many moving to boroughs in outer London where prices were lower. About 200 temporary tenants who had undetermined rights to council housing and were mainly from black and ethnic minority backgrounds were rehoused according to their individual circumstances, as Southwark Council phrased it. The so-called early housing sites that were to have been the Haygate's residents' new homes weren't completed until many years later. So the Haygate was demolished without rehousing the Haygate residents, and it is now being replaced by Elephant Park and Trafalgar Place, both private developments built by Australian multinational developer Lend-Lease. These two developments together occupy the old Haygate footprint and will have over twice the number of new homes that the Haygate had, 2,900 new homes compared to the Haygate's 1,200 homes. Most of the new homes on Elephant Park and Trafalgar Place will be free market, and according to the estate agent Foxtons, are currently on sale for between £932,000 and £1.8 million. Many of the homes in the early phases were marketed and sold overseas, in Singapore and Hong Kong. At least 46 units out of 179 homes in South Garden Point blocks were sold in Singapore in 2014. And despite more than doubling the number of homes on the site, only about 600 will be affordable, half the number of the Haygate, and just 100 of these will be social rented homes. Unsurprisingly, given this lack of social housing and the passage of time, not many old Haygate residents will be living on Elephant Park. A recent FOI request revealed only 48 Haygate households had returned and have no homes in the new development. Next door to the Haygate stands the famous Elephant and Castle shopping centre. This is the key site in the Elephant and Castle regeneration, and it is also marked for demolition. Unlike the Haygate though, this is privately owned by a group made up of a Dutch pension fund and a Qatari sovereign wealth fund, and led by private developer Delancey. The shopping centre was home to about 130 independent traders, as well as chain retail outlets like WH Smith, Tesco and Boots. Since it was built in 1963, it has also become a social and cultural hub for different ethnic minority groups, particularly for people from Latin America. It had many cafes, bars, restaurants, and sold food from around the world. It also boasted the second largest bingo hall in Britain, a bowling alley, the Coronet night venue, and the Charlie Chaplin pub. Developer Delancey's ideas for the shopping centre, however, had no room for any of these. Instead of a shopping centre, there will be a mixed-use town centre of residential towers for nearly 1,000 rented homes, retail floor space, and a new campus for the University of Arts London. Delancey will also build, but not pay for, a new entrance at the Elephant and Northern Line tube station. Delancey's plans, though, reckoned without the opposition of the local community, and it did not get planning permission until it had made relatively small but significant concessions. A hard-fought campaign by traders, housing activists, the Latin community and councillors on 116 social rented homes and relocation spaces on 3 sites for about 45 traders and funds to help them move. After these concessions were made, Delancey secured planning permission for its proposals at the 3rd attempt and has so far survived a legal challenge against its plans. The centre is just closed, ready for demolition, but the battle continues to find homes for the many traders who have ended up with nowhere to go. Around about the shopping centre and Elephant Park, there are the 5 towers of shame. 1 the Elephant, Elephant 1, the Uncle Building, 251 Tower, and the Strata Tower. These are residential towers with about 1,800 homes, built by Delancey and associated companies and Lend-Lease. We call them the Towers of Shame because there is not a single social rented home in any of them, and less than 350 affordable homes all told. All 5 towers were approved for development by Southwark Council, despite falling short of its affordable housing requirement, that 35% of all new homes should be affordable and half of these should be social rented. The developers avoided building affordable and social housing by using so-called viability assessments. The developers claimed that the viability assessments showed that they could not make enough profit to allow social housing to be built, and on every occasion Southwark Council rather weakly agreed with them and approved the developments. Other private low-rise developments provide more affordable housing, but even when we get social housing, we only get about 17 units in every 100. A scandalously low number in a borough where 40% of households have an annual income of less than £25,000. The Haygate early housing sites, when eventually completed, provided around 500 social rented homes. But this is still a long way short of the 1,200 council homes that were demolished. The overwhelming number of properties built in the Elephant and Castle regeneration are for sale and private rent at prices that are way beyond the means of most people living at the Elephant and of those living elsewhere in the borough who depend upon the council and social rented housing for decent homes. The Mayor of London made the Elephant and Castle into a so-called opportunity area to allow for taller, bigger and denser development. The Elephant was to attract private developers by its combination of low land values, great transport links, and its position right next to the City of London and not far from the West End. Developers would make a profit, would also bring new jobs, new homes, and prosperity to the Elephant and the people living and working there. That was the plan, but it has not worked out that way. The people who lived on the Haygate had to leave, and there are no homes for them on Elephant Park. Independent traders at the shopping centre, most from black and ethnic minority communities, had to leave because they did not get relocated to new premises. The shoppers and customers who used to go to the bowling alley, the bingo hall, the pub and the Coronet have already gone. They will be replaced by other homeowners, shoppers and customers, if and when the regeneration is completed, but they will be different people who will by and large have more money. This is not what Southwark promised the people of the Elephant, but there has to be a suspicion that this is what they always had in mind.
Thanks very much for your contribution, Jerry. So we will be moving on soon to the Brandon Estate, Walworth, Peckham and Dulwich. But before we do that, we're going to pause in our journey to welcome Councillor Leo Pollock. Leo is the Cabinet Member for Housing, and he's also he's a councillor in South Bermondsey Ward. So he's going to talk to us about council housing, building of council housing in the borough, present and future.
Fantastic. Thank you, Anne. Yeah. Thank you, Anne, Clive, Patrick, everybody who's organised this event, and to all the other speakers. It's a real privilege to be part of an event alongside, activists, writers, architects who've done so much to raise the status of council housing in the public discourse. It's a particular privilege to be speaking alongside Kate McIntosh, who is a hero of mine and arguably one of the greatest council housing architects this borough's ever seen. So I'm hoping that the story I will tell, which is about trying to bring the waxing and waning of policy, funding, political will towards trying to meet the housing needs of Southwark residents up to the present day and beyond, will hopefully provide a good kind of helicopter view of a wider context that we're operating in. So I'm just going to try and get my screen up. Can people see that? Yeah. So the starting point we have really is, as Jerry kind of rightly says, is that there's been tremendous development pressures, a shortage of grant funding, right to buy discounts, a history certainly in the 90s and noughties in which council housing wasn't given the priority and value that it needed. You saw lots of housing stock transferred over to housing associations, and this gentrifying tornado kind of sweeping through many neighbourhoods throughout London. But the key role that we've had as a council, certainly in recent years, has been to try and secure the maximum amount of social rent housing through the planning system as is possible. And I can certainly say in the last 2 years, not a single housing planning application has gone through without a full policy compliant level of affordable housing on site. And crucially, building up our council house building programme so that we are that major countervailing force delivering genuine social rent housing that's secure, affordable, and for the residents of Southwark. Let's see if this works. So the backdrop we have today, certainly exacerbated by the unemployment and the threat of arrears and eviction created by the pandemic, is that we have huge housing need in the borough. There's now over 14,000 households on our council homes register, over 3,000 children growing up in temporary accommodation. And part of this context is that back in 2013, we set a generational target to build 11,000 council homes, with at least 2,500 of those either delivered or on site by 2022. Jerry's pointed to the incredible unaffordability of the new housing that's coming forward. So we make it the explicit mission of the Southwark New Homes programme to maximise the overall proportion and supply of genuine council homes as far as the programme viability will allow. Most of these sites are on infill sites on existing council estates because the land is free, and land, which I'll get onto, is incredibly expensive and protected in law. The speculative premium, the hope value is enshrined for land traders. But we try to do this all within the framework of what we call the Great Estates Programme, which is something we introduced 2 years ago that's all about celebrating our estates, affirming them for the long term, and making sure that we're looking to expand and enrich our council estates by building high quality new council homes, and making sure that when we do that, we're bringing investments into existing homes as well. So there's an uplift in everyone's living environment, not just those lucky enough to get a new council home, as well as lots of improvements to the communal environment, be it painting, lighting, gardening, food growing, public art projects, you name it. We want to make sure that residents are creating the plan for the future of their estate, with a lot of influence over the design brief, the selection of architects, and signing off key moments in the process. It should also be said that part of the Great Estates approach as well is to restate in clear black and white terms the circumstances for any redevelopment proposal. So we nailed this down in December of 2018 in the Great Estates vision paper, that there always has to be a net increase in council homes, a right to remain, deep involvement with residents, and an independently managed ballot of affected residents where we're looking to do comprehensive redevelopment. And so far, and certainly the experience of the Haygate has been instructive in informing this approach that we have from here on in. And to date, we've been having really kind of intensive process with residents. The 2 estates on the Old Kent Road where we're having this conversation have been led by residents. We've had a whittling down survey of different improvement or redevelopment options. and we'll be taking those forward in the new year. I should also add that when we build new council homes, they're for local people. So we are now looking to move to up to 100% local lettings for people who live immediately around a development site. You have to put up with construction going on around them. And also making sure that we can vacate people who are in homes in lettable condition, given extra priority, so we can maximise the chain of benefit for every new council home that is built. And alongside this, we like to pre-allocate those homes as much as possible shortly after the construction work begins, so that residents can have a real choice over some of the finishes in their council homes. This shouldn't be a privilege just for the private sector housing. And crucially, we're militant about design when it comes to council house building. We have a glorious history and an inglorious history side by side of council housing design in Southwark. And it's critically important that the homes we're building are not only properly durable and manageable, but they are beautiful and they convey a sense of municipal pride and civic pride, and that they are a real kind of strong statement that this is a borough built for the many, not the few. And with that, we've created our new architects framework that's bringing in a lot of the best new architectural talent in Britain and beyond into our council house building programme. We've got a new expansion round of the framework that we've created to get a more diverse pool of architects into our design work. The architecture profession can be very white and middle class. And alongside that as well, we have this thing we call the Dare to Design programme in partnership with Open City, where the design challenges in our council house building are put to teenagers and with kind of clear routes into the architecture profession. But these three pictures here, the one on the left, Meeting House Lane in Peckham, Howth Tompkins, is due to complete later this year or early next year. In the middle there, you've got a scheme on Albion Street, Rotherhithe, that will be starting in the next few weeks as well. Crucially also, it's so easy for the housing efforts to tackle the housing crisis to cut across efforts to tackle the climate crisis and vice versa. So we require really strong standards of energy efficiency, new renewables, plugging into expanded heat production networks in and around the borough, including the expansion of the Selship system on the Old Kent Road. We're also really keen to drive down the embodied energy of new buildings and bring forward new low waste, low impact forms of development. Carbon and steel have huge carbon footprints attached to them along the supply chain. And obviously, we're keen to bring forward fire safe ways of doing engineered timber building, and with that promoting reforestation options across the country, so we can actually have a timber industry again. We haven't really had one ever since Henry VIII cleared what remained of the forests to build a navy to conquer the world, which is a fat lot of use to us in 2020. Finally as well, we accompany all these projects with a nature recovery plan. The climate and ecological crisis go hand in hand, and it's often right under our nose in the city. So we make sure there's always a net increase in tree canopy coverage and lots of new opportunities for habitat development. So since we began this programme, from a standing start, we're finally now in a place where we're starting to accelerate and get projects on site. The pandemic has been a bit of a kick in the backside in terms of slowing projects down, but we're now due to have, against that target of 2,500, around 3,000 completed or on site by 2022. But the crucial thing here is that we're developing the pipeline, and I'll get onto some of the challenges and opportunities in that when I talk about some of the frontiers. Also worth mentioning that we've built ourselves up as a developer on our own right in-house now, and that gives us a lot stronger influence when it comes to what you do with particular sites, as well as our ability to lever in new partnerships with community groups, with builders, and with landowners as well. And crucially, we are expanding the programme now, like the clappers. I'll put in at the end of this a link to a map that shows every council home scheme that we have going. We've got 120 live sites. It was very satisfying after that depressing election in December last year to put 21 new sites into the programme the day after. And there's another 50 odd that will be coming into the programme in the next few weeks as well. But the frontiers to council house building in the 21st century are very different to the interwar period, the philanthropic period, or even the post-war period, quite simply because we have a built-up borough, and crucially the land trading guidance and land compensation rules make it very difficult to fit affordability into the viability of schemes that come forward. So here are some of the ways we're trying to tackle this. So number one is we're working really closely with faith groups, and we set up a special housing and faith working group, working with the Southwark Citizens network of community organisers, the diocese, the Baptist churches, the mosques as well. We've now, in the process of setting this up, already unlocked 5 new schemes that will be delivering over 200 homes. We have negotiations ongoing with many others, but this is all about locking arms with faith groups, talking about how the housing crisis is affecting different communities across the borough, and crucially getting that moral mission at front and centre when it comes to faith groups thinking about how they invest in their own assets. Secondly, and this may seem unintuitive to many of you, but we buy new land to build new council housing. It always troubles me a little bit that other boroughs don't appear to be doing this, but we bought some major new sites, particularly on the Old Kent Road, but also in Rotherhithe and Bermondsey, to build hundreds, sometimes thousands of new council homes. But we're always trying to capture sites before they're allocated in the plan, when they're known as windfall sites that haven't got all of that kind of speculative heat building up around them. And alongside that, we have this ongoing campaign, Affordable Land for Affordable Housing, to reform that 1961 Land Compensation Code that shifted all the valuations of land towards the speculative premium, protecting the hope value rather than the existing use value. And we're building an evidence base as well, showing how the existing use values of sites are sometimes many multiples smaller than the actual real world land transactions that are taking place in Southwark. We were making a bit of progress under Theresa May, but what little progressive thinking there was in the Tory government has vanished, obviously, since Boris took over. Frontier number 3 is roads. So roads are really important for permeability, for walking, cycling, socialising, buying things. But crucially, in a higgledy-piggledy borough like Southwark with a medieval street pattern, we have lots of roads here and there that are a little bit surplus to requirements. This is a project I'm particularly proud of. This is Styles House estate next to Southwark Tube. The road that I'm just hovering over here, Jones Street, we're effectively deleting, and this is a planning application that should be getting permission hopefully any day soon. This has been a great project that's had huge community involvement. The residents signed off every design stage. It's also had a really great partnership with TfL, who are obviously under tremendous pressure from the government at the minute, enabled by a land swap with them. But there are great opportunities to review the role of roads, particularly since the pandemic, where the priority for low traffic neighbourhoods is growing stronger and stronger.
Leo,
Not really.
Leo, sorry to interrupt. I can't leave you very much longer because we've got a lot of other people to.
I'll be about 2 or 3 minutes, if that's okay.
Okay, lovely. Thanks very much.
So this is less of an opportunity for Southwark, so I'll skip over it, but there are lots of deep railway cuttings around London, but including in Southwark, where there's great opportunities to build new council homes. We've also set ourselves up as the largest rooftop builder, I was told, in Europe. The other day, we have hundreds of structurally sound flat roof blocks, clear secure access, limited amenity impacts if you build up. And the beauty of this is that you can prolong the life cycle of existing estate blocks, preserve the embodied energy and carbon, get thermal efficiencies into the existing blocks, and crucially, find a new way of investing in estates, regenerating estates without any demolition or forced rehousing. So we've created some special development principles, building off site, so we're on site for a brief period of time, first dibs for all residents who live immediately underneath, so long as they return their homes in lettable condition, and improvements to the existing blocks, so there's no, with any new roof lift or landscape, non-rechargeable to tenants and leaseholders. Another genuinely serious frontier is the River Thames. So we're looking to expand our berth holding spaces on Greenland Dock, this little bit of blue you can see on the bottom right here, alongside our expansion and upgrade of the council-owned dockyard here. But there's a fantastic opportunity with the completion of the super sewer project that will clear the water quality, key moment in the history of the Thames, in 2-3 years' time, for new human and animal habitats to be developed along this stretch. We've already got a successful residential moorings at Tower Bridge. There's lots of purpose-built floating housing opportunities as well. And we've got a great conversation going with the Port of London Authority, and we'll be setting up a new visioning exercise and public engagement plan in a few weeks' time to really front load the community benefits, make this something that is genuinely democratises access to and use of the river. Ever since the docks were filled in and repurposed, people have been cut off from the main natural asset of the city, and it's something that we've got a great opportunity to solve here. And there's potential space for up to 700 affordable homes. This one is always undisclosed, but it's code name Bromley. So there's lots of Tory boroughs that don't meet their housing targets, aren't interested in building affordable housing, and aren't really putting their hands to the wheel in terms of building a better borough. So we're quite interested to see if we can partner with them and help them along the way. I've said undisclosed because there's only so much I can say about that without getting into a lot of trouble. So partnerships, housing, faith groups, housing cooperatives, almshouse charities, community land trusts, the Leather Market CBS, who came out of the Leather Market TMO, we have a great partnership with on 9 different sites, and lots of different routes to unfurl to deliver 11,000 council homes. And my final plea really is just to get involved in this effort. We have had a touring exhibition, The History of Council Housing, going around the borough, which unfortunately has been limited by the pandemic. We're putting together a book with an essay on all 260 council estates in Southwark. So if you want to contribute to that, do get in touch. Do track our progress as well. We've got a website that shows all the schemes, the timeframes, the design evolution. We've got launch parties, again, pandemic permitting, for lots of schemes that are due to complete in the next weeks and months. And if you know of any housing co-ops, faith groups who want to work with us to tackle the housing crisis, do put them in touch. And of course, we're campaigning on everything to get the LHA rate up so that people can genuinely afford the housing costs in Southwark, suspending and getting rid of right to buy, overhauling our broken land trading system, and crucially getting that all-important investment into council housing that we know pays huge dividends back to the Treasury, but crucially is going to meet the housing needs of our borough's residents. So I'll leave it at that.
Thanks very much, Leo. Yeah, sorry I had to rush you there.
That's all right.
And you've got a lot to say, I understand that. We're going to move on now to the Brandon estate. Yeah. So we've now got a contribution from Catherine Croft, who is not actually with us. She pre-recorded her contribution. She's the director of the 20th Century Society, which campaigns to save outstanding buildings and design that have shaped the British landscape since 1914. She's a lecturer on architecture and has written a book called Concrete Architecture. And she lives very close to the Brandon estate, and she's going to talk to us about that estate in this presentation we're just going to have a look at now.
Hello, I'm Catherine Croft. I'm Director of 20th Century Society, which campaigns for the preservation of buildings from 1918 onwards. And I'm going to talk about the Brandon estate. So the Brandon estate is the large estate behind Kennington Park. It was designed by the London County Council, and the architect was Ted Hollamby, who went on very famously to be the lead architect for the London Borough of Lambeth. It was built from 1955 to 1962. And I'm going to talk about why I think it's special. I'm going to give you a brief tour of the estate, and I'm going to talk briefly about issues to do with densification and conservation. So this is probably the most well-known view of the estate. This is what you see if you look south from the park. You see 6 of these 18-storey tower blocks in a bucolic landscape. And at the time they were built, these were the tallest blocks that the LCC had ever done. But the other remarkable thing about the estate was that it was the very first time that the LCC had combined keeping existing buildings and modernising them with developing new high-rise and mid and low-rise buildings, all as one unified estate. I think the towers were probably very much following on from the success of the LCC towers at Roehampton, which were internationally acclaimed, and they do have that same kind of impressive sculptural appeal as you see them from the park. But I think that actually the other bits of the Brandon estate are probably more interesting. It's also very well endowed with very high quality art. This is a Henry Moore from 1961, which was the most expensive piece of sculpture that the LCC had ever bought when they got hold of it. It cost them £8,000, and Hollenby compared that with just over £3,000 that he had spent on using his own in-house team to do a number of murals and sculptures across the estate, including this one at the top of the building on the left. This is the tower that kind of marks the entrance to the shopping parade on the estate, and it has this white and gold tile mural across the top. There were other murals, mainly actually within the shopping centre, one of which is an illuminated mammoth, has been recently reinstated. There was also a Chartist mural which has been lost. Brandon is also highly regarded because it was the subject of a book. Tony Parker wrote The People of Providence in 1983, and it's basically a collection of oral history interviews. And they were all carried out on the Brandon estate. Brandon is Providence, not very rigorously concealed. So here on the left, to give you a flavour of that book, some of the chapter headings. So that's in talking to residents in each of the 6 towers. And on the right here, there's an extract from one of those interviews with someone who is clearly absolutely delighted by their home, and was very keen to express their enthusiasm. Now, I'm going to walk us round and look at some of the specific bits of the estate. Up here, this is Lorimer Square, where there's a church built to replace a Victorian church that was damaged by bombing. Down here is Forsyth Gardens, another large open space. And here are the tower blocks at this end of the estate. And through here is where the shopping street is. Okay, so on the left here, you can see that little parade of shops looking like something that's escaped from a contemporary new town development. And this is part of the estate that was completely pedestrianised. Originally, it had really lovely pebble and gravel paving scheme in squares, but unfortunately that's been lost and it's now just asphalt. On the right is St Paul's Lorimer Square, the new build church that was constructed actually basically on the foundations of the Victorian church, so that within that building itself you've got the combination of new and old that sort of exemplifies the estate as a whole. Those 2 main squares are fronted by very different looking blocks of maisonettes. So on the left here, there is Lorimer Square, and on the right, Forsyth Gardens. As you can see, flat roofed versus pitched roofs, brick and concrete versus largely tile hung. And Here are some of the smaller elements of the estate. On the left, housing for old people, and on the right, a terrace of timber boarded row houses. This is just to focus on some of those materials. I think all the buildings across the estate are very well detailed, but one of the criticisms was that there was perhaps just too much going on, too many different materials. So on the left in Lorimer Square, there is boardmark timber at the bottom, and then aggregate, exposed aggregate concrete, oh, sorry, not boardmark timber, boardmark concrete at the bottom, exposed aggregate concrete and brick. And then on the right, on the point block towers, there is bush hammered concrete panels on those middle balcony panels, and a much more refined exposed aggregate panel below, all rather messed up with exposed surface mounted services and loads of satellite dishes. As well as that comment about there perhaps being just too many different materials, the only other criticism at the time that was levelled against the estate was that it wasn't sufficiently rigorous in separating out pedestrians and cars, which is perhaps an interesting thought in today's climate. At the moment, there are posters around the estate about the trial roadblock scheme to deliberately reduce the amount of traffic going through the estate. Here then are some of those retained terraces, and I think the ones on the right with those very regular run of dormers, I'm imagine that those were all extended upwards in the early 60s as part of the incorporation of them into the estate. Not all of the houses that were kept were of particularly high quality. I think it was just that sense of continuity and that retention of the grain of the city that was what they were hoping to preserve. You can see, for instance, on that one on the left, how the door case at the bottom crashes into the projecting bit of wall next to it. The steps into the houses along the street that we're looking at here obviously have all got new front steps, and I was looking at those yesterday and thinking they look very, very shallow, and I was wondering if that again was perhaps an amendment of the 60s to make them perhaps more comfortable as a place to sit. But I don't know, is the short answer. There has been some infill on the Brandon estate, and I don't think this is particularly successful. This block on Hillingdon Road, I'm sure does produce some valuable extra units, but it, to me, feels very much to over-impinge on the modest block that you can see on the right there. I think perhaps with that concern about how much pressure there is to densify estates, as well as issues about maintenance and management and attention to details. The 20th Century Society did a report on conservation areas, looking at existing 20th century building-based conservation areas, and also drawing up some guidelines for the designation of more, and thinking about what that would do. And I think it's very much not about just trying to keep these estates exactly as they are at the moment, but making sure that when decisions are made about both the sort of day-to-day management, major overhaul and repair, and also when we're thinking about where to site new blocks to increase density, that we take those decisions with an understanding of the historic value and importance of the estates that we have, many of which I think are of extremely high quality. And I just wanted to finish up with the Alberta estate, which is just a few hundred yards from the Brandon estate and very, very different. This one was not by the LCC, it's by Southwark, and it's again a mixed estate with little houses on the left, and then on the right, maisonette blocks, and then at the back with the green balconies, there are 2 tower blocks on the estate. This isn't by a named architect, very little seems to be known about it, but I think it works really well, and it works because of the quality of its overall planning and layout and incorporation of public space and its attention to architectural detail. And I think those are the things that we need to make sure that we don't jeopardise as we look to the future of our post-war estates. More of that, and that's me done. Thanks very much. Bye-bye.
Hello, I'm Marion, and I'm going to introduce our next speaker. Thank you very much, Catherine, for particularly bringing up the points about the grain of the city and the importance of street layout and of the public realm. And I'm very pleased when we come to him to be able to introduce Jeremy from Walworth. And he's going to talk particularly about streets, which we all use, and about the public realm, which we all share and see. Are we ready to move to Jeremy? Oh, God.
Hi, hello everybody. Can you see the screen okay? Is the presentation there?
Yes, it's there, Jeremy. Thank you.
Thanks ever so much for the invitation to speak, and thanks so much for being able to take part in this. My name's Jeremy Leach and I live in Walworth. I'm going to talk as part of the Southwark Stroll about Walworth and the 15-minute city, but obviously I'm hoping that some of the ideas in here will resonate with, obviously other parts of Southwark. So here we go for a quick wander through Walworth. So give you an idea of Walworth, the 3 Walworth wards roughly sit within that black line there. And as of 2020, there's about just under 50,000 people live there. What's quite exciting about the Walworth area is just how much of that area you can see is within a 10-minute walk, a half-a-mile radius of the heart of Walworth, which is the old village centre of it's now Penrose Street, used to be West Lane, the Walworth Road and East Street. So, absolutely almost all of the people who live in that area are within a short walk of the centre of the area. Secondly, as I said, just under 50,000 people live in Walworth, incredibly dense, really, like the other parts such as Camberwell, Peckham and Kennington, Newington and Walworth, really sort of densely. So you've got a great number of people living in the catchment area of the High Street, which is the Walworth Road. Also really satisfying as well for the area is the fact it's a very diverse area, very mixed communities, and we still retain a large number of the Southwark Council estates in that. So, which again means that the Walworth Road can act as a very diverse centre with lots of varied offers for people who live across the area. Another aspect of the Walworth, which is, again, not unique, but indicative of, Camberwell, Peckham and large parts of Southwark, is very low levels of car ownership. On average, this is the 2011 census data, but it's not changed a great deal. 68% of households in Walworth do not own a car, much higher proportion than the Southwark average, 58%, the London average, 42%, and obviously the England average of 26%. So many people relying on walking and hopefully cycling in due course, but relying also on public transport, and the Walworth Road is one of the biggest bus corridors in London. Another, again, sort of just building up the evidence here, another really unusual and interesting fact about Walworth is just how reliant on walking the town centre is. This was some research done back in 2014 for Southwark Council. As you can see, there's around a third of shoppers on Canada Water, Camberwell and Peckham arrive on foot. In Walworth, it's a much higher proportion because you've got that incredibly dense town centre with high levels of residential areas to the east and west. Again, sort of really important that that walking is catered for. So what is it about Walworth that's attractive? So one of the interesting things in the French paper about the 15-minute city and the 15-minute walk is what's the amenities are like, and that's where, you know, the Walworth Road scores really highly. You've got a great variety of food stores such as Ollie Stores, Iceland, Morrison Supermarket, and then of course East Street Market. Still got banks. I mean, there's not many now. There's only Santander and Barclays, but still banks right along the high street. And then also post office. And then what's really interesting in the top right-hand corner is the fact that, you know, there are chains on the Walworth Road, but mostly it's a huge sort of mix of independent stores as well, which really add to the variety of the shopping offer. And then there's pubs as well. It's the Red Lion, the Manor of Walworth, and obviously the redoubtable Tankard, all sort of surviving on the Walworth Road. And then obviously Southwark itself has invested a lot in libraries across the borough. We've got, you know, coming, it's probably not going to be winter 2020, but early 2021 now, there's going to be a new Heritage Centre and Walworth Library. So lots of new things happening, and obviously hopefully in time, right next to it's going to be the Walworth Square and the redeveloped community space in the town hall. So in all that, then how are we making the environment more attractive? Well, Southwark's been working very hard. And initially there was a project called Our Healthy Walworth, which was in conjunction with the Mayor of London, looking at a low emissions neighbourhood. That's morphed into the post-COVID lockdown response of Walworth Healthy Streets. So you can start to see how the streets are changing around Walworth, again, to enable people to walk and cycle in more safely and without intimidation from traffic into the Walworth Road. And obviously what's great about, say, the Browning Street closure here, you can see there's an opportunity to start to reuse that and reimagine that space in the longer term. Perhaps a sort of, you know, spill out space for the cafe, greening as well. But you can see how the streets are starting to change to support walking, cycling more. And obviously about 10 years ago, there was a big change in the Walworth Road, initially in response to the fact there were a lot of road casualties there. In the central section, the road was widened a lot, it was narrowed a lot, and the pavements were widened, the guardrail was removed and some planting and trees were placed in there. And again, that central section became much more attractive and safer to cross for people on foot. However, I mean, this is not for now because obviously there's an awful lot going on and funding's at a premium, but there are two sections which remain quite wide and out of character with that central section, both to the north of Browning Street and Manor Place, up towards Haygate Street. Again, an anomaly where it's much wider there and obviously faster and harder to cross. And then south around the Gateway Estate, there's that old sort of 4-lane, slightly motorway style. So again, hopefully in time, those will be addressed and narrowed and made more easier to cross. Another thing about Walworth is, you know, a lot of green space there. East Walworth known for its pocket parks and its East Walworth green links. Great deal of greenery, as sort of Leo and Catherine pointed out, a lot of green space in the estates as well, which adds to the sense of greenery across the area. Again, you know, opportunities here to start to, as the ideas about what streets are for, chances to repurpose streets has happened here around the Pullins to make them greener, perhaps as temperatures get hotter as time goes on, to start repurposing with trees and having a more continuous canopy. So lots of opportunities to turn them into people spaces rather than dull spaces that just have parked vehicles on them. And again, here's an example of a street that hopefully we think would be ripe to be turned and to be repurposed. Again, this is our only Grade 1 listed building, St. Peter's Church on Liverpool Grove. Could we imagine this as a sort of green avenue and route to that, and then on to Faraday Gardens and all the estates that are beyond there? Could it be more than this rather dull tarmac and car parking is at the minute? So that's why I sort of put Walworth forward as a candidate, and obviously I'd say lots of other parts of Southwark. huge number of local amenities, great access to public transport, easily walkable and cycle high street town centre. But can we do more to rethink the streets to be more sustainable? Can we start to link up the green spaces and create others so that people can be more active and have more access to greenery? So a naive perhaps question here, do we have in Walworth and other Southwark town centres potential model inner cities for zero carbon living, which itself offers huge improvements potentially for well-being, happiness, physical activity and sustainable living? I hope that's of interest, and thank you so much.
Thank you. I think that was a really great presentation, and it's great to see how Southwark could really move forward with the new agenda that's, you know, partly being sprung on us, but partly some of us have been working for years for a more sustainable city. So thank you very much, Jeremy. And now we're moving out of Walworth, further south, down the Walworth Road towards Peckham. And I'm very, very pleased to be able to introduce Owen Hatherley, who's a very well-known architectural writer and is also a cultural editor for Tribune magazine, and Dave Lewis, who I know through the Labour Party as he's our CLP secretary, but he's also chair of the Tenants and Residents Association of Sow Gardens. And both of them are enthusiasts for this estate. And I think it's great that they are able to explain what they like about it and how much it's come from the past to the present. Unfortunately, Owen couldn't be with us today, so this video that will be shown next was pre-recorded with both of them yesterday, and it was an enormous pleasure to do so. So I hope we're ready to start with the video now. I'm sure it's going to come up. It was quite a large file, so it's probably, here it is.
So I thought I'd start off not talking about Sow Gardens at all, but talking about where I live. Because I think one of the things that's been most important during lockdown for people has been whether or not they've got any access to any kind of green space or open space. Its absence has been really, really difficult for people. And those who have it, I think, have coped a lot better and found this a much more bearable experience than those without. So, although I'm not going to say exactly where it is, this is where I live. So this is a block, I think, of the late 40s, early 50s, on the site of a V1 attack. So thanks there to the Luftwaffe. And the interesting thing about it for me is that these two blocks, there's two blocks on this estate, very, very small little estate, were sort of took over the private gardens that were previously on the site. So you had this kind of movement, I think, at the time in the way that land was treated, that the idea of it being, of kind of public space out in the open being private was regarded with great suspicion at the time, with fairly good reason, I think. And from the kind of, really from the 30s onwards, there starts to be the kind of removal of railings, particularly during the war, actually, to melt it down for scrap. But the removal of railings from squares, the removal of gates, and when housing is rebuilt anew, you get some previously what were private gardens start to be taken over and become public. So a lot of people that live in quite high density blocks of flats will nonetheless end up having quite a lot of public space and green space and trees because of that. The kind of major kind of monument of that really is outside the borough altogether. which is the Alton estate in Roehampton in Wandsworth. And here, the grounds of this very big kind of London County Council estate are taken over from 4 different country houses. So this kind of space that was purely for the aristocracy, purely for the nobs, was immediately became, when the land was taken over by the London County Council and it became sort of green space between blocks, became the communal gardens for council tenants. And I think if there's a kind of example of what sort of democratic socialism is, I think that's a very good one. That you compulsorily purchase the land of the rich who don't need it and you turn it over to ordinary people. I think that's a great model of how land should be used in the city, and I think we should see a lot more of it. So because of it being in this quite kind of urban inner city site, at Sayo Gardens you don't have this quite the same kind of sense of vast green spaces that you do in the Alton estate, but you still have a lot of it compared to the average housing estate, even of that era. You have, as you can see here, these kind of big expanses of shrubbery, you have these kind of odd paths, you have loads and loads of trees everywhere, and you have these kind of often quite sort of little bits of walls and little bits of fragments of what was there before. This is not a great picture, so sorry about that. I've got a better one here, which I think shows also the kind of mix of buildings on the site. And to kind of get what was sort of interesting about this, even at the time, compared to a lot of things that local authorities were doing, it's worth consulting Ian Nairn's book, Nairn's London, composed in 1966, which is one of the kind of great classic books on London by a kind of architecture critic who was much more interested in how kind of people interacted with buildings than whether or not they were kind of interesting as monuments. And he writes about it twice. Once in, I've got these 2 very dog-eared books. Once in Modern Buildings in London, 1964, published by London Transport, as you can see with this crane holding up a little tube roundel. And then Nairn's London, which my copy of, as you see here, is in 5 pieces. So I'm just going to read out what he says about Sayo Gardens, because I think it's a really nice description of what's interesting about it. On that clogged main road that runs from Camberwell Green to New Cross, by Camberwell Borough Council's architectural department, they have the individuality and sense of place for lack of which most London County Council estates become abstract exercises. Many of the designers came in fact from the LCC and clearly must have found that a smaller organisation gave them deeper freedom. Sayo Gardens is a good sensitive example of a conventional layout, high slabs, medium maisonettes and a few low houses. What makes it special is the thick landscape which was taken over. It is not fenced in either, but given over to the kids. So instead of geometry and lawns, there is a living undergrowth, and the concrete slabs peer out like prehistoric animals. The kids will beat it down in the end, I fear, but meanwhile the magical transformation has happened, and an estate has turned into a place. I think that's really wonderful little description of how this kind of space was thought out and the ways in which it was used. And just as one last kind of irrelevant but kind of quite interesting fact about the estate is that it was home for a little while to some of the members of the band Pulp. There's no blue plaque, to my knowledge, which I think is a shame, considering especially that they made most of their best records when they were living on the estate. But if you know the video to Babies from 1992, you'll see at the start a little kind of intertitle comes up saying setting, and then you see these successive pictures of the estate. So I think there's kind of plenty to start with there, but I'll leave Dave, who actually lives there, which I don't, to talk about it.
Aaron, thanks. And you reminded me about Babies. I'd completely forgotten that, and you're right. I didn't know that any of them actually lived on the estate, but I do remember picking up that that was in the video when I saw it. It took me by surprise, to be honest. And Jarvis Cocker lived in Lyndhurst Way at one point, I think, and there's a song called 79 Lyndhurst Way on one of the earlier albums. So I thought that was the connection. So it's nice to know. For those of you that don't know me, I'm Dave Lewis. I'm the Secretary for My Sins of Camberwell and Peckham Labour Party, but I'm here wearing a different hat today in that I'm the chair of Sow Gardens Tenants and Residents Association, which has been up and running pretty much continuously since the estate opened in 1959. I've lived here since 1986. I live in Marie Curie, which is one of the two large tenements, and genuinely like living on the estate. And it has, the way that it's been built, you can almost forget that Peckham Road is literally a few feet away, really, because you can hear it on occasions, but most of the time you can't. And that is quite an achievement, actually, given how busy that road is, really. I wanted to talk a little bit about the history of the estate, really. It has a French name. That was the product of a friendship link between Camberwell Borough Council, which was the predecessor of Southwark, who built the estate in 1959 and 1960. They had a friendship link with one of the outer suburbs of Paris, which eventually got absorbed into Greater Paris. Those sorts of that sort of friendship link was very, very popular and common post-war, for obvious reasons, really, between the countries that were part of the Allied forces at the time. There is a stately home called Palais de Sow, well, a former stately home called Palais de Sow, which Sow village took its name from. The architects that conceptualised the building of the estate went to Paris, wandered around Sow, borrowed many of the names of the streets and some of the buildings to name the blocks on the estate, and they all have French names. Stretch it, Marie Curie was actually Polish, but she was married to a French person, but all of the others were French people. So they're all named after French historical figures. I don't know very much about architecture, and that's where, Owen, you can kind of fill in a little bit for me really here, but I suppose that it's a bit brutalist in some ways, but it has a certain beauty as a consequence, I think, really. I moved here in '86, as I said, moving into a tenement. I'd lived in high-rise tenements before, but I'd never, ever found a tenement that had wooden floorboards because everything is normally concrete, and there are concrete partitions between each of the dwellings here. It's a mix of two very large, tall tenements and some lower-rise blocks of 5-6 stories, right the way down to 2 rows of bungalows. The bungalows were set aside for elderly people, and that principle applied right up until the late 90s, when housing need overtook that aspiration, and they were then allocated to families from that point on. 14 stories was in 1959 the highest that it was that it was possible to build a tenement, a lift-served tenement at that time. But 1959, when they designed some of the dwellings, they were playing around with traditional design, i.e. you have the living space on the ground floor, the bedrooms and the bathroom on the upper floor if it was 2 stories. And they played around with that in the high-rise dwellings so that the bedrooms are on the entrance floor, the ground floor effectively of each dwelling, and the bathroom, and the living space is on the upper floor, and the living space runs from one side of the block to the other. They put huge windows in those dwellings to make them light. The living space is very large and very, very bright. Camberwell Borough Council were very proud of Sow Gardens when they built it and broadcast this in the Architect's Journal. I don't know categorically this is the case, that where Southwark Town Hall, the old Southwark Town Hall building on the corner of Peckham Road and Havel Street is now, was a building called Camberwell House. It was an asylum, and the land to the rear, which is now where Sow Gardens is, was gardens and a working farm for the people that lived in that asylum at the time. So a lot of the trees are 150, 200 years old on the estate. So it was all quite mature when the estate was built in the late 50s. There were aspects of the design that worked and survived, and aspects that didn't survive, really. There was an enclosed play area on the mezzanine floor of Marie Curie, where children were encouraged to go and play football and all that kind of stuff. That lasted about 5 years because the people that lived immediately above them got tired of the noise that created. So that eventually was turned into what is now a tenants' hall. The idea of people having washing machines in 1959 in their individual homes, that was utopia in the minds of most people living in social housing. So there was a washroom on the ground floor of Marie Curie that was available to all of the residents on the estate. They had washing machines and dryers and mangles and all that kind of stuff. That lasted for about 10 years until the utopia of the washing machine became a little bit more realisable. There was a terrace of shops built on the estate, which appear in your photograph, actually, that you showed earlier there, Owen, but they're gone now. They lasted until the late 80s, early 90s, and were overtaken, really, by events. You know, there were 6 shops there. When I moved here in 86, there were 2 that were functioning, a corner shop and a hairdresser's, and they eventually closed, and they were borderline derelict for a few years. You know, the things that have been happening more recently, a community garden has been established at the rear of one of the low-rise blocks, so that there are raised beds there now for residents to grow plants, vegetables, that kind of stuff. It's been going for about 4 years. There are about 20 individual residents that are participating in that scheme. About 4 of them actually made the whole scheme happen. I wasn't one of those. And there are like community engagement projects going on at the moment with Theatre Peckham, which is on Havel Street, next door to us. It's been there for quite a long time. And the South London Gallery, which is on Peckham Road, they have an outreach project. So they have an art block at the foot of Lacanau. That project has been going, aimed at young people, for about 6 or 7 years. Started as a concept called the Shop of Possibilities in one of the derelict shops, and then they secured the space under Lacanau when Lacanau was refurbished, and that engages kids in art projects from Sow Gardens, but also the wider SE5 area as well. Really, the Lacanau fire was obviously quite a dark period, really, for the estate. And for 4 to 5 years, there was a prospect that Sow Gardens wouldn't survive, actually. If Lacanau had been demolished, Marie Curie would have as well. And that would then threaten the viability of the rest of the estate. So there was a really strong possibility that the whole lot would have been levelled. The fire was obviously tragic. 6 people died, 3 of them young children. but the spread of fire wasn't actually down to the design, the original design of the blocks. It was subsequent refurbishment works that had taken place in them over, well, in more recent times, since the year 2000 primarily, really, that meant that many of the compartmentalisation aspects of the block had been compromised by that work. But we're out the other end of that now. Lakanul is repopulated. The estate, it has survived that period, and thank goodness. But it was a very difficult time, actually, for all of us that lived through that at the time, because we thought we'd end up being decanted across the borough, and fortunately that didn't happen. And I can leave it there if you like.
So if there's anything else I'd like to mention about the estate, it's about the way that you can or can't walk around it from the rest of the area. So Dave might be able to correct me on this, but my memory from when I moved to the area about 20 years ago was that you could go through the block Voltaire to get through, off Peckham Road, and that got closed off. So now you have to go quite a kind of roundabout route round the sides of the estate if you're coming off Peckham Road in order to get into it. And there's one exception to this, and it's one of the, for me, one of the most interesting spaces built in the borough in the last 10 years, really, which is the Orozco Garden, which I'm probably pronouncing wrong. The Orozco Garden, designed by the Mexican artist Gabriel Orozco and the architect 6A, at the back of the South London Gallery. And you can sort of see here the bit of it where it connects to So Gardens. You've got this kind of odd kind of back end of the South London Gallery being converted into this public garden, which then has this very clear path through to the estate. So rather than it kind of walling itself off from the estate, as I think a lot of art galleries probably would from a South East London Council estate, there's instead this kind of very kind of obvious and clear path between the two. What I think is quite a shame is that it's only really opened at the weekends, and that it's gated, I think, most of the rest of the time, which means that it feels slightly false, this kind of link between the gallery and the estate, because you know, in weekdays you can't really do it. But it does mean that the kind of quickest way from the estate to Peckham Road on a weekend is through the art gallery, which I think is quite a nice touch.
Can I say something on that, Marion?
Okay.
Before, you're right, you used to be able to get onto Peckham Road or from Peckham Road through Voltaire, which is the only block that fronts Peckham Road. And the entry phone system that went in there meant that that got closed off. When it was still open, the South London Gallery, I don't know whether this is a sense of humour on their part or just devilment, actually, but there were certain exhibitions that they used to force people not to use the Peckham Road entrance to the gallery, but to go through Voltaire, along the bungalows and through that garden, before that garden was actually constructed in its final form, really. And it was very entertaining, actually, watching people visiting the art gallery in uncharted territory, really, that they didn't look particularly comfortable in. So all credit to the South London Gallery. We've got a really good relationship with them, actually, and we have well, not now because of COVID, but we have coffee mornings once a month there aimed at elderly residents, and they've got a couple of meeting spaces there that we use. So elderly people and those with kids that are around during the day. Young children at preschool, and that works fairly well, actually, really, I think. But that's suspended at the moment until the whole COVID crisis passes.
Thank you. Are we done? So we're going to move next to a piece by Nick Cobb, which is going to be, it's great that Dave was mentioning all the work that goes on at South London Gallery. Nick Cobb is actually a local artist, a local Peckham-based artist who divides his time between teaching, making model dioramas, many of them about the local area, and photographing the landscape. The images move quite quickly, so I'm also going to post on the chat a link to this YouTube presentation so that if people are interested, they can take a longer look later. Thank you.
Hello everyone, and thanks for having me along. I'm presenting a group of drawings titled A Journey of Life down Peckham's Rye Lane, from mother care to co-op funeral care. And my name is Nicholas Cobb. In 2015, I made a 21-foot long diorama model of my local shopping street, Rye Lane. The following year, after some modifications, I made these drawings of it. Great sweep of time is portrayed in the work, from the Ice Age to a post-oil future, where the London floodplain has reached Peckham's library area. Also depicted here is the proposed 1960s flyover, thankfully never built. The imagined future depicts a levee trying to keep the rising sea levels at bay to the north, near Mothercare. And with the last drawings, mounds of rubble have claimed where co-op funeral care now stands to the south. In between down Rye Lane, a canal has replaced the tarmac, and previous transport methods were also thrown into the mix. Here, William Blake's Angel is up in the tree by Primark. And on the building's roofs, winged figures look down on the people passing by. Amongst other illusions, they could be seen to represent future ghosts who have come to haunt us and lament our stewardship of the planet. Geese on the way to market from Goose Green. Peckham Rye railway station, past, future. So these resilient figures appear to be getting on with their lives despite the implied dystopia. And even this week, Rye Lane featured on the 10 o'clock news, where I saw a little snippet of a cricket match drawing in the crowds. So Rye Lane always managing to cope with change. Railway tracks all ripped up. Transport methods going from one place to another. What's out there beyond Rye Lane? The back of Cairns, but also depicting roof gardens where perhaps vegetables are being grown. Here, opposite Cairns, maybe an allotment. Once where the cinema stood. Now a car park, but perhaps in the near future will be a block of flats. In the middle ground, cows are being milked. In the foreground, cat watches some birds. And way back, woolly mammoths could have found their way through these swampy areas. And here, down at the end of Rye Lane, where the co-op funeral care still stands and Aussies has survived, JFK may survive despite the building next door going up. And perhaps in Victorian times, there was a farm and grazing horses. But perhaps way back, or perhaps in the future, great piles of rubble fill this area now. So thanks for joining me on this odd little diversion of Rye Lane, imagined past, present and future.
So thanks to Nick Cobb for providing that lovely presentation, yeah, I do take the time to have a look at it more slowly, you know, as we provided the link. As he said in that, Rye Lane's always coping with change, and there's been so many things that have changed in Rye Lane, so many things that have been proposed for change. Obviously, we can't talk about all of them today, but we're going to focus on a proposed scheme which is causing a lot of concern to local people. The proposed development of around the Aylsham Centre. So there's Aylsham Community Action is a campaign which has brought together a number of local organisations, Peckham Vision, Peckham Heritage Regeneration Partnership and others, and also some individual residents. And so we've invited two of the people involved in that campaign to speak to us today, Josh Bools and Winnie Obese Bemkopong. They're both local residents, and certainly I'm not sure what else Josh does, but certainly Winnie works in the local community, and they're both local residents. So I think Josh is going to speak first, and for not more than 5 minutes each. So Josh, I haven't seen you, but I know you're here. Okay, yes, you're there.
I am here. Hopefully the video is now working. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I certainly hear you. Yes, I'm just trying to see you, but yes.
Perfect.
Go ahead.
Hi, everyone. So thank you for that introduction, and thanks everyone for their time. I'd appreciate, I know I've got a few moments, only about 5 minutes, so I'll be as quickly as possible, but I am a resident from Purden House and also representing on Aylsham Community Action. So those who aren't familiar with Purden House, that is sandwiched between Prince of Peckham and the Peckham bus station. So it's right there, just next to the Aylsham Centre. So, I mean, part of the reason for the campaign or the community action group to bring together was not to be rejective of this proposal of the site, but actually, more than anything, we're very supportive of a new development in the Aylsham site. It's an opportunity to bring genuinely affordable housing, economic activity and public benefit to Peckham Town Centre overall. The only challenge and issue that we've really had here, and the reason why we all sort of came together, is the consultation hasn't really, what we think, has been good enough, with the current proposals remaining many different questions just not being answered. Really what we're calling for is just a proper consultation that has a meaningful contribution from actually the Peckham community. I mean, it's been going on for a few years, this consultation. 2017, there was a citizens charter, Peckham Citizens Charter, for the development of this, supported by the community leaders and our MP, Harriet Harman. But we're not really sure why this has been sidelined. So again, yeah, in February, previous to the pandemic, there was an exhibition snuck away in the Aylsham Centre. There was only two ways you'd know about it, either through word of mouth or passing through, and then obviously I happened to be passing through. So, but given from then, February, to October, where we are now, I was personally assured by different architects and conversations of different versions of what is now being displayed architecturally on the public website. So a lot of this mainly includes the heights and the position of the buildings that were proposed, and also the overall proposed construction timelines. The recent consultation of mine and many other opinions is obviously it's not been professionally carried out, and I think it's fair to say that given COVID-19, it probably definitely needs a review. I mean, the deadline in its own was August 2020. So if you consider the holiday season and then COVID from March through to August, that was no time for either the developers to listen or the public to give their opinions. And I can tell from that, from speaking with my neighbours, I confidently say that no one received any information to support any consultation. And I've not been able to get in contact with anyone from Tiger coordinating the consultation. So it's been a very interesting time. I think it's really important to highlight this is not NIMBY style campaign. It's nothing to do with not being in my backyard, and in fact it's quite the opposite. Very supportive. Like I said, the neighbours in Purden House and across the way are very supportive of this, but I don't think, and I'm not sure whether we've had a proper open-ended discussion to just look at the design and see if it's really got a genuinely sort of design that's affordable for going to be for the local people, for housing. So, you know, I think 37% of affordable housing is what's been proposed here. I don't know whether Southwark knows what the definition of affordable is, because when we look at it, it's probably going to be a lot of luxury housing, or will it be multi-million-pound flats looking over Peckham Town Centre with the 20 stories? We don't know. No one knows, because we haven't had that opportunity. It is something that's backed by BlackRock. For those who are unfamiliar, it's the largest, or one of the largest global asset managements. So we know that there is a profit to be made, and that's the nature of the business. However, we just need to understand, if we can have a conversation, sure, maybe, you know, viability wise, they need to make that profit, but let's do it in a fairer way that benefits the town. Speaking of, you know, the benefits, you know, the likes of the rooftop bars and all that economy there, it's going to have an effect on the footfall for the business and all the surrounding areas around Morrison's, including Peckham High Street. I've been speaking with a few of the local independents over the last few months, and they're totally unaware, very unimpressed with the proposal. And, you know, 7 years of construction around this sort of area is going to have a huge impact. There's another impact as well, where there's going to be business units proposed in the site into the design, and I think, realistically speaking, it's going to make room for larger corporations, which is fine, but it probably will sort of start to muscle in and actually create unfairer competition. So I think there's definitely a bit of an issue there. We are, you know, there is a climate emergency. We all know it. It's inevitably happening. And the way in which we're moving towards identifying how we can reduce that carbon footprint is obviously more important than ever. I don't think there's been enough thought, really, except for the electric bus station, which is proposed, about the amount of public spaces, public infrastructure, you know, given social distancing now, which is more important than ever and won't be going away. Surely this should be looking at a zero carbon and not an offset carbon payment, which they're doing now. But it's an opportunity, and I think it resonates with every conversation that's been happening today, to have a real sustainable development, and to Southwark and Peckham to lead that kind of way for the future. Just a few more points, apologies. The development, my and everyone else's sort of opinion, is out of scale. It's going to have an effect, a damaging, dwarfing effect to the Rye Lane conservation area. It's going to tower over there, the clock tower. You know, you've got the HSBC building on the corner of Hanover Park, but it's going to be very narrow as it is from Rye Lane. But the buildings that are proposed on scale are going to be the height of Regent Street, and looking at that with narrower lanes, just doing a bit of quick maths, you're basically looking at developing a town within a town, and 900 new homes. Assume 2.5 per occupancy. That's going to be nearly 2,500 people within that small amount of space. So we're talking here again about Aylsham site, which is, you know, Morrison's and the bus station. It's sort of that area. So that's a lot of people, and height seems to be the only way that they can deal with that. But it doesn't look like there's enough scope for green or space or anything sort of residential. So really, just to kind of summarise on that, you know, the consultation hasn't been consultative enough. I think there needs to be a bit more time to speak with the Peckham community, be it businesses or residents, just to really go over that and consider what really is happening here, especially when we need to review a totally new world now. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Josh. Yeah, so Winnie, could you say what you'd like to say now?
Hello, everyone. I'm Winifred. I feel a bit so unprepared because after hearing what everybody has said in presentation, now I feel like I shouldn't have been here. Well, so I am a resident of Peckham. I've lived in Peckham for 15 years, and I've worked in Peckham for almost 7-8 years. 3.5 years as a post lady in Peckham, and the rest of my years as a debt coach for Christians Against Poverty in All Saint Peckham Church, and I'm also a community outreach worker. I became involved with Elsham Development Centre through Peckham Citizens. Because of my work in All Saint, I was part of the team that work with the council and Tiger developers, the developers that are building the Elsham, to put in a charter. So Peckham has put in a charter, Peckham Elsham Charter, to bring together a whole lot of ideas for the developers and Southwark Council to work together to bring a positive change to Peckham. And this policy has been adopted by Southwark Council, where they've used it in some of their consultation to make changes in Southwark. Why did I become involved in this project? As I said, I'm a single parent to a young daughter, 10-year-old child, and living in Peckham. Peckham is my home, a place where I want to build a good future for myself and my child. When I go to Peckham, I meet people and I'm stopped on the street, and some of the time my time is spent engaging with people than going to do what I do. So Peckham is my home. Therefore, I wanted to make a contribution to the society and the community. So I became very interested in the project. And apart from my work taking me in, I developed a personal interest as well. But throughout the processing of this project, it has become evident that the developers are not in for what we aspire for Peckham. What do we aspire for Peckham? For Peckham to be a place where we can have affordable homes. And when we talk about affordable homes, not affordable home where a home is being sold for $500,000 for a studio flat. That is what the developers are proposing. We put in the charter affordable home that is based on the income of the citizens of Peckham, such as a community land trust. So we propose a 35% affordable home in the charter. We also propose for good jobs in Peckham, because through our citizens and our engagement with the local children in the community and schools, children, when they are asked to go for job experiences, there is not much opportunity for them, and they are told to go to the betting shop to go and do job apprenticeship, go to the supermarket for job apprenticeship, which is great. Supermarket work is great, but there should be more beyond that. Children should be able to aspire for things if they have the desire and the capability to do so, but there is not much opportunity for the children. So we put in this in the charter as well. Another thing that we put in is to celebrate Peckham, the diversity in Peckham. I see Peckham as a united nation. When I work in Peckham, you hear every language in Peckham. So we want to celebrate that. So all of this is highlighted in. And the final bit is the a celebration of Peckham that represent the community in terms of fabrics. For instance, the building side, as Josh spoke about, the tower buildings and all those things. So we propose that there shouldn't be any high building or a tower block that should be more than 9-story building, which is all put in the charter. We had an assembly where we had almost about 500 people in attendance, including the MP of Peckham, Harriet Herman, and by then we had the council were present, Tiger were present, and the council did agree to our charter and endorse the charter. However, Tiger, on the other hand, hasn't publicly endorsed the charter. And over the past few months, there has been a few consultation and workshop, and charter has made it seem as if that they are engaging with Peckham citizens, and we are a representation of the community. Yes, we are an institution of 21 institutions that each institution comes with a variety of people. So we are quite a big institution. However, they have not engaged with us. And for that reasons, we haven't been able to have a proper consultation. So Josh is right to say that the community of Peckham haven't been properly engaged. It's the same with us as well. The Tiger agreed to meet with us every 6 weeks so we can discuss how their project is coming along. For the past 1.5 years, we have had no communication or engagement with Tiger. We have got no idea what they propose in terms of planning until recently during the August period when they put exhibition out to say they're having a consultation. So for me, it really, really troubles me for such a development that could bring positive change to Peckham to be done in a way that it seems to me that the only thing that is being visible or interested here is, shall I say the word, capitalism, to get profit out of for their own development, but not for the well-being of people. My work as a debt coach take me into people's home, and I've seen how people are struggling in terms of mental health, poverty, not being able to have a home that is conducive. I myself going through the same problem. You've got homes that are not built in a way that people can have a proper decent life to contribute to society. So I think it is very important going forward that the council really engages with the local community people to be able to put in a proper consultation policies that help develop the community, that will flourish the community, but not rather tarnish it. And most of the time, I remember, I think it was...
I'm terribly sorry, Winnie, but do you think we can move on, because we do have another speaker? And
that's fine.
Well, thanks very much for your contribution. That the things you had to say about the Citizens Charter and everything are very important. Yeah.
Thank you.
But thanks ever so much for coming. Yeah.
I think it's really important we hear from local residents, and I'm so glad that you were able to join us, and you definitely should have been with us. And we really welcome your views, and thank you for joining us at such short notice. Yeah. And we'd like to move on to our last, well, no, she's not our last, our penultimate speaker, Kate McIntosh, who is a wonderful architect, and she was an absolute pioneer. When I qualified as an architect in the mid-70s, she was one of the few women architects who are renowned. And not only that, she is someone who has devoted the early part of most of her career to building very much for people. She worked for Southwark Council and has recently and was recognised by the RIBA for her work in Lambeth. And we're absolutely thrilled that she has been able to join us, because she was the architect at a very young age of Dawson Heights, which I think all of us will have seen on the skyline of our borough. Over to you, Kate. Kate, is she here?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much for that, those kind remarks, your introduction. Could we have the first slide, please? You may be familiar with this graph, which was prepared by James Meek. What it shows is the upper dark part is the supply of social housing during the period up to the rise of Thatcherism, and then the tap suddenly being turned off, and the housing association, and the bottom palest grey is the private sector, continue on at about the same rate. But the dotted line, which rises exponentially, that is the inflation in housing. Now, last year we had the centenary of the passing of the Addison Act, which was the first bit of legislation which actually put in some compulsion on councils to review the housing within their area and engage in slum clearance and providing social housing out of public finances. Before 1979, there was more or less cross-party consensus recognizing that shelter, health and education are all inextricably linked. Those three requirements for a decent life. And that the provision of a safety net to ensure that these basic needs were met was a governmental responsibility. All of this framework of progressive protection has been picked apart following the introduction of right to buy. And over the last 5 years, an average of 21,500 roughly social homes have been sold each year, and each of these carrying an average subsidy out of the public purse of £60,370. In 79, over a third of the nation's housing stock was in public ownership and was publicly managed. Now it's about a sixth and still shrinking. Next slide. It was in 1965 that I joined Southwark Borough Architects Department and was presented with this phenomenal, exciting site, Dawson's Hill, quite near to Dulwich, from which you can see to the north, to the city and the former, as they were then, docklands, now the towers of the city, and to the south to over Crystal Palace as far as the Sussex Weald. The brief called for just under 300 dwellings of a great mixture of different sizes. I wanted to fully exploit the advantages of these rare views, and another major driver in evolving the design was the extremely unstable ground conditions on the site, which meant that even a single-story structure required 30-metre driven piles. So that's a vast expense going into the ground. And my solution was, as you see here, this pair of interlocking ziggurats, varying in height from 12 stories to 3 stories. And the tail of each of the higher blocks flips around at 90 degrees, providing a sense of enclosure for the communal car-free space in the centre. Next slide, please. Next slide. Can we have the next slide? Thank you. From this, you get some impression of the view to the north. Also, you can see the reduction in scale at the extremities of each of the ziggurats was acknowledging the surrounding scale of the suburban villas. And by staggering the high points, the point of this was to reduce the blocking of sun and view for both of the two blocks, and allow the maximum penetration of sunlight both into the dwellings. All of the sitting rooms are south facing, and as the arc of the sun comes round the low summer sun, it enters the central space from east and west. Next slide, please. The parking and garaging is half concealed below the north side of the blocks, the opposite side of the access road is banked to draw the eye across to the landscape beyond. So this central space is completely car-free and therefore entirely safe and well supervised for children to play. Next slide, please. The central conundrum for volume housing design, in my view, is to get the balance right between privacy and connectivity. So every dwelling has a balcony, and some of them have 2 balconies. These were proofed against the value engineering of the quantity surveyor, because each one of them is an alternative means of escape balcony. There you see the communal access way where the projecting stores include refuse, which then conveyed to a collection point. Next slide, please. Parker Morris' report, Homes for Today and Tomorrow, was published under the Macmillan government in 1961 and was adopted by all the London boroughs when housing responsibility was transferred in 64. Density at Dawson's Heights is over 3 times what the planners in Winchester deem suitable for our car-dependent suburban developments, but it is medium rise, not high rise. It's not necessary to go build these enormously high towers in order to achieve high density. And the question of density is not just one about the our profligate use of the finite resource of land, but that more intense occupation reduces journey times and therefore promotes green modes of travel, supports local facilities and makes public transport viable. Now this slide here shows how I devised the mixing of the different dwelling types so that a 1-bedroom, a 2-bedroom and a 3-bedroom dwelling are sharing the same access way. The access ways occur every 3rd floor, which means the lifts are more efficient as they only stop every 3rd floor. And each living room is only half a flight away from the front door. There are split level maisonettes, so you can get through ventilation, which was much valued during our very hot summer just past. The 4-bedroom units are all located off the lowest of the access ways and so are relatively close to the green space. Next slide, please. The scheme was taken over by Southern Housing Group Association sometime during the 1980s, when Thatcher, of course, was starving local authorities of funds and clawing back most of the rents to the central exchequer and even disallowing them to use the capital receipts in full from the sales under right to buy. So under this, therefore the maintenance was rather poor and the place fell into disrepair, and Southern Housing Group was taken over, took the place over. And under, I think, the influence of the edicts of Alice Coleman, who was Thatcher's housing advisor, the linking bridges between these lowest 3-story blocks and the lifts, the vertical circulation, were taken out, which I regret, since it diminishes the sense of containment within the central area. And no doubt Alice Coleman's philosophy will be promoted further by the Building Better, Building Beautiful group, whose appointees include that notable bigot Roger Scruton. Next slide, please. Now, about a third of the maisonettes are now in leasehold occupation, but this has not affected the sense of cohesion and social conviviality within the community, which still thrives. And the central space, as you see here, is well used. And indeed, the children from the surrounding community, the pre-existing suburban houses, come here to play. This is where the action is. Next slide, please. The lower part of the slope, which was universally deemed to be completely economically unbuildable, under the ownership of the Housing Association, has been designated as a nature reserve, which is open to the public at large, which I very much applaud. So this is a very popular place to go to look at fireworks over the Thames on November the 5th or any other national celebration. And lastly, if we could have the last slide, I'd like to talk about land inflation. The reason the corporate world is so keen to invest in land is vividly illustrated in this graph. The top line you see inflating exponentially is the value of land. And below that are dwellings, other buildings, and other forms of wealth. And London, of course, is notoriously the laundromat for dirty money for the entire world, mostly going into property. Inflation in housing is basically rooted in land prices and scarcity, and therefore fairer access to essential shelter has to start with an examination of this issue. Land with planning consent for housing is worth up to 250 times more than farmland, and this astronomical windfall profit should accrue to the community at large, as was done under the Attlee government with the land betterment tax, which was of course abandoned by the incoming Conservatives in 1954. Have I run out of time? I could go on endlessly, but I don't want to frustrate your last speaker.
I think actually, as it's been quite a long session and we're over 2 hours, if you wouldn't mind just wrapping up now, that would be very good. Thank you.
Defer. Yes.
So is there a final thought you would like to leave us with about public housing?
Here's my final thought. Since 79, 50% of public land holding has been privatised under the doctrine of shrink the state, as all public bodies, from the Forestry Commission through to the Ministry of Defence and of course local government, have been obliged to prepare yearly audits of their land and property, together with justification for the need for that requirement. And so naturally, as austerity has bitten, local authorities have been obliged to shed staff and activities, and therefore can appear that their property holdings are excessive to requirement. But no such onus to justify need is placed on the private sector, where it is almost impossible to discover who owns what, as purchases are frequently made through shell companies registered in tax havens, and therefore land banking is rampant, and this corporate capture of public land is, in my view, a form of legal larceny.
Thank you. I think they're quite strong message to leave us with, and relates very much to all our presentations. And now we move on.
Right. Yes, so our last speaker is a member of the team that organised this, Harps Audula. She's a Labour Party member and she's a planning solicitor with Southwark Law Centre. And she's going to talk briefly about community engagement in the planning process and how we might respond to the Tories' new white paper on housing, which I think has been mentioned earlier, briefly.
Yeah, hi everyone. This has been fascinating and I'm not going to take up much more time, but I do just want to, my section isn't as interesting as some of the past ones. It's more of a call to arms about consultations that are going on at the moment. The first being a planning white paper, which is being implemented by the Department of Housing and Local Communities. Just going to share my screen. If I could be enabled to share my screen, that would be great. But at the moment, a consultation is open till the 29th of October. I still can't share my screen. So I had some points on that. But what the white paper does is talk primarily about building housing and saying that not enough housing is being built and that it is, this is being held up by the planning system. I can share my screen now. So it attacks democracy and community participation in planning and really reduces the oversight that we would have in planning applications, restricting comments to design codes, and it proposes zones defined as growth, renewal and protected zones, and there would be a presumption in favour of granting planning in growth zones. So say Peckham and the area where the Aylsham Centre is would be defined as a growth zone. Comments, as you've heard from the previous speakers about their concerns with the application, wouldn't be comments that could be considered in deciding the application. It also blames the planning system, as I said before, for the failures to build housing, and unsurprisingly doesn't mention land banking or property speculation. And there's some great resources out there, including an article from 2018 by Anne Pettifor in The Guardian about the crisis of property speculation. Land banking is where developers sit on a planning permission site because planning permission greatly increases the value and then they can sell it off at a vast profit. There's no mention of social or council housing in the white paper, again, unsurprisingly, but this is something that it would be really important for as many people as feel able to raise. And there's mentions about reforms to what we now call Section 106 agreements and community infrastructure levy payments, but basically they're ways in which we can effectively get commitments, including money, out of private developments to fund local infrastructure, but also things like social and affordable housing. So there's a proposal for an infrastructure levy, and we might want to comment on how that could directly work if we're sort of saying it should be given to the council to build council housing. There is also a consultation going on the new Southwark plan. I think a link will be sent to that in the chat. And the new Southwark plan is the local plan for the borough, and it's about October. If you're inspired by what you've heard today, do have a look at the link and see whether you might be able to respond. And if you've got any questions on that, please do contact me. Thanks. Thanks.
So, thank you, Harps, and thank you, everyone. Briefly, to finish, to say that just as travellers, we now leave the good folk of Southwark. Given the time and space, you've heard their stories, our stories, know something of their lives, the struggles of their days in fellowship, and pilgrims where they all that toward Canterbury wouldn't ride in cars, trains, buses, bicycles, and on foot. Perhaps now we're footsore and ready to head for some hostelry. There is an opportunity. It's been a very long slog and you're probably all tired. I think we're going to hang around for any questions, discussions briefly that people may want to linger for. Noting one of the things that Kate said about the corporate capture of public land, sort of mindful as a question to hang in the air is, how we can all perhaps learn from the other campaigns and contribute to the Aylsham campaign that Winifred and Josh spoke so eloquently about, and to think how that can be supported, and also how the council perhaps can learn from those campaigns and any mistakes that may have been made, so that we progress more positively into the future. So we are done. So it just remains, if people do want to hang around for questions or comments briefly, we can, but we understand that it's been a long slog. But we thank you all very, very much indeed for coming, and it's been a great privilege to have you all, and it's been wonderful to hear from all the many speakers.
And if anybody does want to say anything, if they want to put a raised hand or put something in the chat quickly. There's about 50 of us left. So if anybody, Dave wants to say something, and Leo?
Yeah, thank you to the people that have organised this. The technology makes it feel a little bit stiff sometimes, and you did a really good job. And Clive, introducing a little bit of art into the event works, I think, very well. Thank you for doing that. The thing I'm left with really is how, whether we're elected members, residents, campaigners, activists, that we're all quite proud of the area that we live in, and that's a very positive thing to come out, really. I don't know whether Jeremy's still here, but I loved hearing Jeremy talking up Walworth, because it doesn't get that often enough, I think. And it's a fabulous place, really. So thank you to everyone. And thank you for Julian in the background, trying to get the slides up when people were demanding them as well. So thanks.
Yeah, I think Leo had his hand up.
Yeah, I just want to say thanks as well. It was a fantastic set of presentations, and as Dave says, I think people are really proud of our borough and the amazing kind of history and legacy that we have, that we benefit from today. I wanted to just quickly comment on something. So I've got a kind of note here following on from Harps's presentation, which I completely agreed with. It's the planning white paper is absolutely catastrophic. It's kind of an overturning of the fundamentals of the post-war planning settlement, where that basic thing in the 1948 Town and Country Planning Act of nationalising land use and promoting public land ownership is being overridden. There's actually no mention of land use at all in the planning white paper. So it's something that we're really, really concerned about in the council. Just to flag with you really, so we're normally, these kind of consultations just sort of happen with officers. It's quite technical, there's some political oversight to get the tone of it right, but we're actually bringing this one to our public cabinet meeting on Tuesday next week on the 20th. I know there's been some requests, quite a few requests. It's a packed agenda. It's item 17 in the link that I've just left on the chat. But yeah, we're really keen to campaign with anyone who wants to join with us to get a really strong council and community voice projected to government on this.
Thanks, Lou. Pascal's got a hand up.
Yeah. Hi.
Oh,
yeah, thank you for the very interesting morning, and thank you to all the speakers. I was particularly engaged by what Winnie was saying, and I was a little upset. I know you were limited for time. I appreciate that, but it was a bit upsetting to see a local campaigning, organising person be sort of cut short, because they're the people that are the heart and soul of what's being done. You know, the grassroots are the heart and soul of the party, or the heart and soul of our communities, not just a party, because we're all from different areas on this call today. So I just wanted to personally say thank you, Winnie. Really interesting. You really, I share a lot of community spirit with you, because I also worked with people who suffered with debt, and they're the people that's going to increase, and this housing is needed for them, and particularly with families, we need 3 or 4 bedroomed houses, and there's so much that the community that could have been brought in, as well as this kind of wonderful, inspiring meeting about architecture, about planning, about art, all those essences. But our communities are the most important things. So thanks.
I wonder if Winnie would like to add anything. I'm sorry I had to jump in, otherwise I was worried we'd lose our audience. Was there anything else was there anything that you would like to say? Because people were saying that they were sorry you had to cut your presentation a bit short.
No, it's all right. I understand that there's a lot of a variety of things that need to be covered, so I totally understand. However, I really feel that there's a lot to be gained or generated through this project, and if only the council, for instance, Leo, will really mobilize for the politicians and also those in charge of the planning to make the necessary adjustment, so the development will serve the people, the local people, well, than making a project that is just going to create profit for developers, and in the end becoming a ghost town where if people cannot afford to buy, it will be just an empty space lying where it doesn't serve the proper need of the citizens of Peckham and addressing the council need to build affordable housing for the community.
I think Leo wants to talk again.
Yeah, so I'll just see if there's anybody else who hasn't spoken. Yeah, okay, yeah.
You need to.
I don't want to talk and talk. I just want to acknowledge that, really, and assure Winnie and Josh and everyone in Peckham Vision and Peckham Society who've been campaigning on this, that we've been pushing BlackRock and Tiger very hard on their application. We don't want them to submit it in its current form at all. It's not been responsive to what residents are saying, especially given that we had absolute clarity in the form of the Citizens' Charter. It was endorsed by the council and the MP, as you said. It's a lack of proper engagement. The relationship to the Clifton estate isn't strong enough. The affordable housing could be stronger. Jobs and apprentices for local people. It's too separated from the local town centre. The impact on heritage buildings, the rooftop use. So you're absolutely right. It's not there yet. Far from it. I posted something in the chat just sort of summarising sort of the current position we've got at the minute, and a link to some of their latest proposals, just so people are familiar with what they're coming forward with. But totally agree with you, and yeah, stay in touch with Johnson City and the leader as well, because we're working closely we're keen to work with the community to get a better outcome there.
Jerry has his hand up. Yeah, you're on mute, Jerry.
Yes, about the Elsham Centre, I was very interested in both Josh and Winnie's contributions and comments about how the consultation is going. I should say, from our own experience of dealing with Lend-Lease and Delancey, 2 very big developers at the Elephant and Castle, dealing with them and getting anything out of them is an uphill battle. Now, I'm not saying this to discourage you, far from it. But I think if you're doing this, you should recognise from the outset that their interests are fundamentally different from those of the local people, I'm afraid. For instance, there is a trade-off between the amount of affordable housing that can be provided and the profit that can be made. So when you are engaging in these consultations with developers, I think you need to, we all need to bear this in mind. They are very happy to consult about all sorts of things, but when you get down to the fundamentals of the development, they insist upon their own interests. And I think what we've seen in Southwark over the last few years is that local campaign groups such as the Elsham, as local campaign groups such as that, which seems to be emerging around the Elsham Centre, and such as we've had at the Elephant and Castle, are beginning to recognise that and are beginning to get greater experience at addressing this problem. The Southwark Law Centre, I know, is just around the corner from the Elsham Centre, and that's provided some very invaluable advice to us at the Elephant and Castle, and I would advise the Elsham campaigners to take advantage of that, and we are always ready to help as well.
Thank you.
That's it.
Thank you. Pascal, I know you've got your hand up. I don't know whether that's remained up from your previous comment or whether you wanted to come back. But if there was anyone else...
it was on my previous comment, Clive.
Ah, okay, no problem. I just wondered if, because we also had to cut short, as well as Winifred, sorry again, we had to cut short Kate slightly, and I wondered if she had any comment on sorry to put you on the spot, Kate, but I wondered if there's any comments based on what you've heard from the conversation since. Is Kate still with us?
Yeah, she is. I
think she's on
Oh,
mute.
Kate, you're on mute.
No, I think she's typing something.
Oh, okay. Oh, okay. Okay, I don't know whether anyone else is saying they want to say anything. So, if we don't, then I guess we're done.